Dear Mother, our encounter with the Infinite Sight weighs heavily on my mind. They took Ezra's book, and I feel like a failure. It was my responsibility to protect Ezra along with the book, and I failed. After we escaped Hug's home, made bandit camp, Ezra found a cave for us to rest in. It's strange, I don't remember him being such a great naturalist. He seems to know the woods like the back of his hand. Hug, our ogre friend, followed us, hoping to keep our company. He's not exactly the brightest flower in the field, but he really is endearing. Hug didn't quite fit in the cave with us, but he laid at the mouth while the rest of us regrouped inside. Bolt fed their little bird, which they've named Callisto, and the others snacked on rations. Ezra tried to explain what had happened to him while he was separated from us, but his memory is very hazy. He remembers being chained with magical vines of some sort. A man named Thulian Krull took the book. The phrase, "It's not about cutting off the branch, it's about shaping the tree," is the one thing he remembers as clear as day. While in the cave, I corresponded with Lucan through my communication ring. I delivered the bad news about losing the book to the Infinite Sight. He was incredibly disappointed and asked us to meet him in Bell's Watch, a 10-day journey from the cave. We left Hug in the cave and continued on our way. Victor gifted Hug the chakram weapon he had collected from the beetle construct, and Bolt gifted him a feather from our elemental friend Embarrass. I did feel quite bad leaving him behind, but there is no way we could have taken him with us. He would slow us down too much. I do hope he is able to make a nice home for himself in the cave. I hate the fact that the Infinite Sight took such advantage of him. He is so harmless. Those who prey on the weak are the vilest among us. We found our way back to the long road. It was filled with the Knights of Greenwood, patrolling the road and warding off nuisance. We even saw several Arcanum airships providing aerial patrol. They didn't seem to pay us any mind. Every morning, Ezra and Victor rise just before the sun comes up. Ezra spends a good half hour obsessively looking over his gear. He then spends about an hour shooting his bow. He's drawn a picture of Thulian Krull and uses it for target practice. The parchment is barely held together as it's now riddled with arrow holes. After practice, Ezra meditates for another half hour. While all of that is happening, Victor is going about his daily practice ritual, which is nearly identical to Ezra's. Those two are constantly talking with each other about their ideals, how the 8 rings compare to Tushin. I love to watch them as I practice my longsword. There's an unspoken rivalry between the two, and it makes for great entertainment. Several days after leaving the cave, we came upon a bear stuck in a trap. I found that if I focus all of my energy on an animal, I can understand it and speak with it too. I told the bear that we would gladly help it if it would promise not to harm us. The bear was in extreme pain and said he would try. I approached the bear and gently stroked his furry head, while Bolt pried the trap open. We were able to free his leg, but he did swipe at both of us with his sharp claws. We were able to jump out of the way just in time. Once the bear was able to control himself, he thanked us. He gave me a quick once-over and then said, "Oh, you're one of theirs," then lumbered off into Bleakwood Forest. I can only assume he was referring to the trio. I feel proud to be recognized as their follower. We finally made it to Bell's Watch. As we approached the city, it was immediately apparent that something was amiss. Every person within our sight was running about. Some appeared to be running for shelter, others preparing for battle. Swords and shields, bows and quivers, axes, and even pitchforks were grasped firmly in the hands of civilians who had a distinct look of dread on their faces. A member of the city guard approached us. She seemed to be expecting us. We asked the reason for the chaos. She looked at us as if we were daft, then motioned behind her, while saying, "The jungle's on the move." I looked closer and realized that the Emerald Wild had grown over the long road ahead of us. Bell's Watch, which straddles the long road, and the part of the town to the north, was completely covered with thick vines, dense underbrush, and a canopy of trees so immense that it blocked most of the daylight. We heard snarls and screams escaping from deep within the wasteland. We followed the guard to the south side of the long road to a home with a pagoda-style roof and a wooden veranda. She opened the front sliding door and told the person on the other side that we had arrived and ushered us in. Standing before us was Lucan. He was dressed in a beautiful black silk kimono. His long, dark plait fell down his back, not a hair out of place. He is likely the most handsome man I've ever been acquainted with. His strong, chiseled jaw and sparkling green eyes. I am a little embarrassed to admit that my stomach does little flip-flops when he smiles at me. Unfortunately, there wasn't a trace of a smile on his face as I introduced him to my comrades and explained in further detail what had happened to Ezra's book. The book I was given explicit instruction to collect and return. Lucan had a look of vehement disappointment on his face. He disclosed that he had just recently learned of the Infinite Sight himself. He had arranged for the Arcanum to pay Ezra a visit to drop the charges against him and his father. Our employer, who he refused to reveal, would like to meet Ezra in person, and suggested that after such a meeting took place, we might devise a plan to reclaim the book from the Infinite Sight. His eyes narrowed, and a frown spread across his lips as he looked upon me. He spared me the embarrassment of reprimanding me in front of my friends. He left us to wait for the Arcanum to arrive. I don't deserve his goodness. He has been far too generous with me when I've failed him. No doubt I've put him in an uncomfortable situation with our employer, losing the book. I sat by myself, staving off tears while we waited for the Arcanum to arrive. Eventually, we heard the hollow chime of a wooden bell. A halfling Arcanum guard by the name of Officer Clover was standing on the front porch. He and Ezra went into a private room and slid the door shut. It wasn't difficult to hear their entire conversation. The paper walls provide the worst privacy. Ezra was completely truthful and told Officer Clover everything. He described Thulian Crawl and even provided the officer with the picture he's been using for target practice. After their meeting, the bounty was removed from Ezra's head. The charges against him dropped, and a promise was given that his father, Trevin, would soon be returned to Willow Creek Hollow, a free man. While Ezra was in his interview, the shouts and screams from outside were difficult to ignore. We exited the house to find the Emerald Wild had grown even more since we first arrived in town. We asked Officer Clover if we could help. He suggested we find Mayor Bolin at Bell's Keep, and that she'd surely be glad to have our assistance. As we found our way to Bell's Keep, we saw warriors of every kind charging into the wild. Knights in magnificent armor on horseback, soldiers dressed in black lacquered armored skirts with heavy helmets, and an army of mostly female dwarves in ancient-looking armor, carrying the Clan Fallowshield banner. Sari engaged in some friendly banter with the Fallowshield dwarves, and they poked fun at her for not having a clan to call her own. Ironically, none in my company, Sari, Ezra, Victor, Bolt, or myself, have a clan to call our own. We are nothing more than clanless wanderers. Mayor Bolin was dressed in a smart blue mariner's jacket and was studying a map when we found her. We offered her help, and she said she could pay us 1 gold per day, with a 50 gold bonus paid to any survivors. She then sent us off with a hardened-looking, tattoo-covered dwarf named Gerard, who was bragging about shoving a manticore back into the wild, and a priest of Valcana named Herdrus. We followed Gerard to the front line of the wild. We all took to arms. As I walked toward the barricade, I was a bundle of emotions. I was still quite distressed by my meeting with Lucan, unsure of my future as his employee. I felt beaten and was frustrated at myself for letting the book fall into the hands of such evil. With the weight of defeat on my shoulders, those tears which I had tried so hard to eradicate found their way to my eyes, and I thought to myself, I am worthless. As this thought crossed my mind, a louder, stronger voice responded. It was the trio, the Talon, the Fang, and the Claw, all speaking in unison. Evoja Ferricu, you have been chosen. You are destined for greatness. Their encouragement was just the boon I needed. I asked for their blessing on my friends. I have never felt their presence in such force, not even when I have been before them speaking face to face. I felt as if their power was coming from within me. Their thoughts trumped my thoughts and soon became my thoughts. It was a transcendent juncture that I shall never forget. In that moment, we were one. The ground began to shake, and the howls and cries from within the Emerald Wild grew so loud my ears started ringing. Without warning, the huge, gnarled hands of a giant tree ant ripped the jungle apart, sending vines and tree trunks hurling. An army of centaurs came pouring out of the wild. Gerard punched his fist into the ground. When he pulled it back out again, it was 3 times as large and made of a durable gray stone. I ran into the fray toward what looked to be the leader of the centaurs. I called upon the energy and power of the earth and sent vines to tie her to the ground. She was too quick and managed to jump over the vines as they erupted from the earth. While this was happening, Victor was throwing out his knives in every direction. Sary's eyes filled with darkness again, and she ran up next to me. Bolt extended their whip, lashing the centaur leader and pulling her closer to them. One of the centaurs ran into Sary's darkness and dissolved into nothing. The fallow shield dwarves behind the barricade showered arrows down on the centaur to our right, followed by one of Ezra's arrows, which left an orange streak of magic in its wake. Sari hit the centaur on our far left with her glaive, and it was consumed by the darkness, unable to harm us without its sight. The centaur that Ezra had hit with his arrow charged at Gerard with her spear. Gerard blocked her spear and sliced her legs off with his axe, then smashed her head with his stone-covered arm. With the defeat of her comrade, another centaur charged Gerard, but he was again able to protect himself from her attack. Several archers at the edge of the wild returned a volley of arrows, but they all missed. I'll always be grateful to Victor for helping me to learn to fight in Sary's darkness. It makes for excellent protection. Victor called his knives back to him, hoping to harm the centaur leader, but she managed to deflect both blades. As she was distracted by Victor's knives, I thrust at her with my longsword, which was glowing green with the divine energy of the trio. She attacked back, insulting the trio, calling them my paltry gods. Sari lunged forward, her glaive impaling the centaur leader, then swiftly hit the centaur on our left with the butt of her weapon. The guttural echoes of the choir swirled around us as the centaur leader became consumed by the darkness and dissolved into nothingness. Bolt ran to the centaur on the right and hit her with their gauntlet, causing her to scream out in agony. Ezra sent 2 of his magical arrows at one of the centaur archers, ripping right through her side. She collapsed into a heap as the orange magic of Ezra's arrows sprinkled down on top of her dead body. Gerard, still brawling with the centaur that had charged him, dropped her to the ground with his stone fist. Victor, Sari, and I all attacked the centaur with us in Sary's darkness. It was Sary's glaive that sent her to the great beyond, and she, like the others, disintegrated, yielding her life to the choir. The remaining centaurs, seeing that they had lost the battle, turned to run for cover in the wild. I watched as Ezra gave a slow exhale and sent an arrow flying, piercing one of the fleeing centaurs right through the heart. Gerard shouted at us that this was the first time they had gained the advantage and ran after the centaurs into the jungle. We quickly followed.